Hello, I'm Peter Craftle. I'm a senior lecturer in human geography at the University of Leicester in the United Kingdom, and I'm here to talk about my forthcoming paper in Antipode. The paper is about the previous UK New Labour government's policy Building Schools for the Future, a policy which sought to see the redesign and reconstruction of each one of England's 3,500 secondary schools up to 2020. The paper itself is a critical analysis of the policy documents surrounding that programme, and it argues that that policy can be seen as utopian in a sense that we can't argue that previous waves of school building, at least during the 1980s and 1990s, and of educational policy can be. That is, that we could see much more explicitly the role of utopian promises and ideals within that policy making. And the paper talks about a range of aspirations and promises for generations of school children, for leaving an architectural legacy and getting the details right this time, and promises of urban regeneration and community regeneration that would be heralded by the building of new schools. So I hope that building on that conceptual usage of the term utopia, the paper makes several contributions to geography as a discipline and also to related disciplines. Firstly, it aims to contribute to emergent geographies of education, where on the one hand, put broadly, those geographies of education have sought to involve large-scale critiques of educational policy, of inclusion, of segregation, and of school catchments. And on the other, they've sought to look within the school walls, as we could say. That is, at teaching and learning practices, and most commonly at processes of gender, racialised, religious identity construction, and also at power relations between teachers and pupils, or between pupils and other pupils within the school. But this paper kind of tries to combine both of those by looking both at the micro-scale, everyday details of school buildings, and zooming out to the national level to a policy that was supposed to transform the landscapes of British schooling for the better. So it uses this notion of utopia to combine different scales and to combine what happens within and without the school walls as part of its analysis. The paper also relates to contemporary matters of concern. For in 2010 there was a change of government in the United Kingdom. The New Labour government was replaced by a Conservative Liberal Democrat government, who proceeded to abolish the Building Schools for the Future scheme soon after they came to power. It was claimed by the then Secretary of State, Michael Gove, that we didn't need brand new architect-designed sparkly buildings in order to create a good quality education. And we can see a kind of spatial shift from a focus upon the architectural promise of material school buildings to modes of social organisation, or spatial organisation if you like. So we now have the free schools policy, and the first free schools have recently been built in the United Kingdom. And the free schools policy allows local communities, especially teachers, parents, local business people, local politicians, to come together to build a school where they feel that there's a need for an alternative, or where they feel that there isn't sufficient educational provision for the children living there. And so there's a spatial shift from focusing upon architectural legacy to focusing upon local communities and local modes of social organisation. There's also been a shift in discourse from these hopeful utopian aspirations that I think characterised New Labour's version of neoliberalism, very much one of wealth and prosperity, to the current austerity strategies, which require a very different kind of emotional and affective mindset. The question now is, firstly, of what is the legacy of building schools for the future? When the scheme was stopped, around 500 schools had been built, and roughly another 500 will be built or have been built since the paper was written at the end of 2010. Interestingly, at the time of the policy, New Labour were criticised because they decided to build their first building schools for the future schools in communities that were undergoing significant forms of deprivation and disadvantage. And it was argued that actually, therefore, we would learn from those communities, and ostensibly the poorest schools and the schools with the most mistakes would be built in those communities. As it happens, what has happened is that by focusing on those communities in those first few waves, at least those communities have had new schools. However, at the same time, the evidence surrounding the success of those schools in promoting social inclusion and educational attainment is patchy, to say the least, as it is around some academy schools. At the same time, there are question marks about the current government's free schools programme. Whether it is going to be elitist, whether it will simply enable those middle-class families and communities with the social, educational and financial capital to mobilise resources to build school buildings, and whether it will simply promote very special interest schools, perhaps along religious need, perhaps along other spiritual needs, perhaps more business-focused, or whether it will truly allow more diversity in British and specifically English schooling. And this leads me to finish by pressing within geography for geographies of educational diversity. That is, to question the extent to which geographers have thus far focused upon mainstream education, rather than those kinds of educational alternatives like Steiner schooling, homeschooling, Montessori schooling, and other forms of education that happen outside of mainstream schools. Now, some geographers have turned their attention to those kinds of studies recently, and there have been studies of learning at home, of homeschooling, and of forms of citizenship education that occur in scouting, for instance. But I think there is a greater need to consider, firstly, the role of alternative education within geographies of education more generally, and secondly, to critically evaluate the extent to which policies like the Free Schools programme will enable those forms of educational diversity to be supported by the state or to exist alongside mainstream state education. And so far I think there's much more to be done in contemporary and future geographies of education.